ahead of tomorrow's Democratic debate and the fast approaching Iowa caucuses. New polling by the Des Moines Register and CNN shows 20% of Iowa caucus goers want to see Bernie Sanders as the Democratic nominee.
Here to weigh in on what all this polling means and the significance really of the Iowa caucus itself is Dave Redlawsk. He's a political scientist. He's author of Why Iowa: How Caucuses and Sequential Elections Improve the Presidential Nominating Process. Dave, it's great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Dave, tell us a little bit about the mechanics of the caucus itself. It's something which is kind of mystifying to a lot of people. I want you to specifically go into the thresholds the candidates need to hit in order to make their votes held, first and second. There's a lot that goes into this.
There is a lot that goes into it. You know, most Americans, of course, if they vote for nominees, they vote in primaries. They go to their usual voting place. They go cast a ballot the way they're used to doing it, and they leave. In Iowa, with the Democratic Iowa caucuses, it's an entirely different process. You have to show up at a certain place, your precinct, at a certain time, 7 p.m., come into a room and mill about with other Iowans from your neighborhood until it is time to do what's called the first alignment. And the first alignment is where you move to different parts of the room depending on the candidate you support. Now, that's really different by itself because it means you're voting publicly, not privately in a voting booth. Once that alignment has happened, the caucus chair counts the ballots, basically counts the people, and determines whether candidates have at least 15% of the support. That's called the threshold. Any candidate who does not have 15% of support, the people who are in that candidate's corner now have a choice. They can either stay there and try to get other people to join them to become viable, to get at least 15%, or they can split up and move to a candidate that is already viable and essentially cast a second choice vote. Most of them will do the latter. That is, they'll cast a second choice vote.
And so how does that change? So we're trying to evaluate this new poll that just came out. Des Moines Register poll is considered sort of the gold standard. Candidates routinely who are ahead in this poll go on to win the Iowa caucus. But how does that caucus process really change the dynamics of those polls and make polling more challenging and figuring out what the end result is going to be ultimately more challenging?
Polling is incredibly challenging in Iowa, which is one reason that the Iowa poll is so well respected, because they do seem to get it right. The part of the reason it's so challenging is that Iowans make up their minds very late, and because of this public process, may change their minds very much at the last minute. So that makes it hard to figure out where we are at any given point in time. But this time around, it's even worse. And it's even worse in that there are 4 frontrunners who have traded front-running positions, but even in this latest Iowa poll, are essentially within the margin of error of each other. That means even though Bernie Sanders is up at 20%, statistically, he's not really in any different place than the other 3. And it suggests this is going to be a very, very close race and will really come down to the strategies on the ground on caucus night.
And so, Dave, can you go into a little bit of that about in the caucus room itself? Are there campaign staffers that are corralling people? How much does an organization matter at a time like that?
So there are about 1,680 precincts around Iowa, and every one of them will have its own individual caucus. The goal of a well-organized campaign is to have a precinct captain in every one of those precincts who is trained to work to convince people to join his or her candidate. Most campaigns don't quite make it to all 1,680, but the top campaigns will be in most of them. And so within the room, what you have going on, both when you come in and then during this so-called realignment process, you have precinct captains for every campaign, and maybe other volunteers as well, talking to you, trying to convince you to join them, trying to convince you even to move. It's important when we talk about these realignments, they don't happen instantaneously. They happen over 15 or 30 minutes. And during that time, there's a lot of milling around, a lot of effort to convince. There may be people standing on tables saying, come join us. There may be people kind of wandering around, talking to people one-on-one. It's how well organized you are to do that and how strategic you are about who you're going after can make a difference.
Well, and especially with such a large field, even Senator Sanders, who's in the lead, is at 20%. So he's only 5 points over that 15 percentage point margin. So it seems like the dynamics here would be particularly complicated. You could have a lot of caucus sites where even the top contenders aren't breaking 15 percentage points. How does that flow into this process?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think it's not very well understood because there are so many precincts and thresholds are applied at the individual precinct level. Even a front runner is going to have precincts where they are not viable. And the question becomes, what's the campaign's plan for sending their people, if they're not viable, somewhere else? Do you send them to somebody who is not doing well so you don't help one of the other front runners? Let's say, for example, Amy Klobuchar, who in the Des Moines Register poll is only running at 6%, but there are precincts where she'll be very close to viability or even viable. If Bernie Sanders isn't viable, it sounds like an odd thing to imagine, but Bernie Sanders people could move over to Klobuchar simply to deny another delegate, a precinct delegate, to Elizabeth Warren. So there is strategy involved, and it goes precinct by precinct.
Mm-hmm. And so this precinct by precinct math, how long does it take in order to get the actual final results of the Iowa caucuses? I know this is always a point of contention every year, every presidential cycle.
Well, last time around in 2016 for the Democrats, it took them till well after midnight, but they had a virtual tie. This time around, what they tell us is that they are going to get the precinct results out as they come in, get them online. As soon as they have the original vote, the realigned vote, and what they call the delegate equivalent, they will post them. We should be able to see them coming in precinct by precinct. Even so, it's likely to be a pretty long night, if only because right now it's likely to be a pretty close race.
And Dave, do you have a sense of which campaigns have the best organization and navigate this process most effectively?
I think the consensus is among people I talk to that the Warren campaign is very, very strong on the ground, that the Buttigieg campaign is close to just as strong in the sense that they have a very large number of organizers, a lot of offices, massive numbers of volunteers. But the more important thing is that they're actually out there identifying voters and tracking them and reaching out to them. Probably most effective of the entire group. I think the Sanders campaign, well, I wouldn't say it's not strong. There's a lot of reliance, I believe, on the support that he had last time around. And remember, he had nearly 50% last time around. And so I think the Sanders folks figure they've got many of those people locked down simply because. And there's some evidence in the polling and in some data that I've collected that Sanders supporters are pretty well locked down. But I don't think they're quite as intensely active as the Warren and Buttigieg campaigns are.
Well, it'll be interesting, Dave. Thank you so much for your analysis. Really interesting.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Next on Rising, the author of Hill Woman describes her insights from growing up in Appalachia. That's next.